Hey, this is Ankita,
And this is Nalini.
and you are tuned in to Prickly Pears, the podcast where we celebrate uninhibited brown women and their prickly points of view. This is a brand new season, and we've been away for long, so I won't keep the suspense. This season is called Spouse It Up. Nalini, what does the word spouse mean?
It depends if you ask me what the spouse originated from and what it means today, right? If you look at the Oxford Dictionary today, it's the typical thing that we would imagine. It's the legally married man or woman to their monogamous life partner. But going back ages, the term spouse came from a Latin word, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, spondere. And spondere stood for to pledge. And to pledge, in those times, people used to pledge their allegiance to a ruler, a leader, a fellow person. So this is when you pledged yourself to another person, is where this originated from. And this season, I don't know about you, Ankita, but I'm hoping to take us back to the origins of the word spouse and where it came from, and what if we were to challenge the norm and challenge stereotypes like we do here at Prickly Pears every season, to dream like this ultra new way of being someone's spouse or finding life partners or finding a way to partner up for life that works for empowered women like us? Like, clearly things are not working out the way they are, right? So we better find a new way. And with that audacious goal, Ankita, why don't you tell us what do you have in mind for this season?
Before I share that, I don't want to come across as the person who's always commenting on the other person's outfit. But given what you're wearing, it feels like you want me to say something about it. So, Nalini, for our listeners, could you please explain what's going on? What's the thing on your head? What's around our neck? And if you're not watching this on video, head over to Instagram and see a few photographs of what's going on.
Okay, well, I'm trying to be the futuristic prickly spouse. Like, what I want to get out of this season. Like, I am an Indian, a Muslim, and a Greek bride all at once. And I'm also a groom at the same time. So, trying to come up with this futuristic idea of a spouse through my clothes that defines the gender norms that we are all breaking every single day. Why just the whale and why just the tux for a man? So that's where I'm coming from. And Ankita, do you want to say anything about what I've bullied you into doing right before the episode?
Yes, I did not turn up on camera like this. I was kicked out of my seat and sent rushing to find something that makes me look more festive or like a wedding guest and not someone who's at the wedding walking up the aisle.
I would take you for a wedding guest any day. Like, you can go to a Western wedding, you can go to an Indian wedding, an Arabic wedding with your attire. So I think you're almost there.
Okay, with that distraction out of the way, I'll tell you what my hopes are from this season and why we're doing it. Two reasons. First, we've had two relatively very serious seasons so far, and it's likely that our next two are also on serious topics. And I needed my dose of laughter, comedy, fun, and just like a break from all the seriousness. And relationships provide endless comedy. Secondly, every single person is curious about relationships in general. It is impossible to be at a party or an event that lasts for longer than an hour and for the discussion to somehow not rotate around marriage, relationships, the futility of it all. So it would be amiss to not discuss it on this podcast, especially when there exist at least 10 million views on this topic of relationships.
So, beyond the futuristic spouse and the ideal futuristic spouse, right? I definitely think that the world, the government, the companies, everybody around us except individuals want the old ancient traditional marital way of life to continue as it is, because it's easier for the government, just for the sake of simplicity of taxation, for the simplicity of like productivity, census, the ease of selling things to consumers. And love is good for the economy, right, according to the government. So if I was a government and I was like, I would encourage more Valentine's Day, I would encourage more weddings, people spending more money on weddings, especially like Indian weddings. It's good for everybody else, but is it good for the individuals that are caught up in this lifelong bond which they signed like on a piece of paper, or like they just took 7 rounds around a fire and suddenly you're supposed to just be each other's life partner forever? And what does forever even mean? Like, this is definitely, that's why I want to do the season. And what I want to come off it is also definitely explore different types of partnerships that are working in this world today. I was reading, we are both not Gen Z, but I'm so curious about how Gen Z and new age people these days are thinking about partnerships. And apart from having record breaking single number of female friends right now in life, when I look at young people today, like the kind of partnerships they are vouching for could range anywhere from living together but still living separately but still being committed to each other kind of partnership. There's polyamorous partnerships, obviously, where you have not just two people in a relationship but 3 or 4 or more together in a new kind of family setup. There is obviously same sex partnership. There could be, especially with people identifying with different genders and like different, whatever they might identify as. Like, there's such a spectrum of even dual partnerships, which are not traditionally male and female. Platonic friends as life partners, which is something that, Ankita, you and I are so keen on exploring more, right? Because personally, we think like some of these are not very relevant to us and our friends, but the friend and platonic partnerships working out, like that's another one. But what does the government have to do? What does like everybody, like how do families come in to support these kind of partnerships? There are so many different directions this could go. So I'm very curious on what our guests are going to say this season, and what do we come up with after this.
What's your stance on spousing it up? Do you believe in like a single life partner?
I mean, as you know, I am happily married with taking the 7 rounds around the fire and signing a joint business agreement with my spouse, with my traditional marital spouse. If you had asked me a few years ago, I would have probably given a different answer. But when I met my husband, it was many of the boxes that I wanted to tick with a life companion, or a companion that was going to be around me forever, or what I looked for in a best friend. When like 7 out of those 10 things ticked in a person, I obviously started changing my mind. And that's why today, if you ask me, I do believe in lifelong partnerships if they are working out. That's why all the legal systems and everything is in place, right? Like, even one day, I hope, like, I don't know who's listening to this, but I know Sherry doesn't listen to most of our episodes. I can say that, like, one day, even before I was getting married, that's what I told myself. I'm not a traditional person. I don't have to think of this as a lifelong thing. Like, I'm just getting into it for the here and now. And here and now seems just perfect with this person. And most of the things I want in a companion, he checks the boxes. So I will go ahead and do it. And let's see how it goes. And like, it's almost 5 years in. It's, touch wood, things are fine. But, when things are not, we'll take a call. And that's how I think about it. Like, it's partnership for now is working. If it's a lifelong thing or not, I can only tell you at the end of my life, Ankita, which is something that you were alluding to, I know, before we started talking.
What you said makes me wonder if that's the missing puzzle. And that's what like movies have sold to us. The whole $1 billion love industry tells us that it's finding the right person, like the one who checks 7 out of 10. And there's someone for everyone in the world. And if you just find that person, the whole model that the society has been pushing works. It's just the probability of that is like, I don't even know if it's realistic, or we just force fit it and say that's the probability. And I'm going to ask you a whole bunch of questions here because obviously I'm very curious about this topic as everyone else. When Sherry asked you to marry him,
I asked him to, yeah. Let me just answer that right first. Like, I asked him to marry me.
yeah, but who asked who is besides the point. But the question I am interested in is, was the question on, are you going to be my life partner, or are you going to, did the question imply that this was for eternity?
No. That's, I've never thought about this actually, Ankita. Kudos for bringing that question up. And now I hope this doesn't send me into a spiral. But yeah, my question to him was indirect because again, like, our stereotypical minds don't always leave us. So my question to him was, are you going to ask me to marry you now? so but it was more and why we were at that stage is also because of the government and the legal and all of that, right? Like, I lived in a different country than him, and for me to move to where he lived and for him to move to where I lived, we had to show a piece of paper. There was no way around it because a Singapore or an Ireland will not accept two people just raising their hands and saying, hey, we want to be together, so can you help me move to your country? They will not accept it. Whereas just a random piece of paper, which like is so easily photoshopable, by the way, like it's not even funny, the Indian marriage certificate. So like you just show a piece of paper that said, yeah, we are, whatever, like legally bound. And then the country allows you to come in like with open arms. So I guess it was to game the systems pretty much. I don't want this to sound like a green card marriage, but
It's not. I can testify to that.
but that's the thing. Like, there was no other way. Like, we never even had another option of a partnership because of this. If we did, I don't know what we would have decided. But you and I both know people, and you're in a partnership. I want to throw this
Yeah.
back to you. How do you think about this, given that you and your partner live in the same country and all of these are not really requirements at this point? Like, how do you think about that?
I love it because if we do choose to get married, it's a decision the two of us take. Like, there are no other variables right now. Maybe at some point of time, work will take us different places and we'll have to make a decision. But I don't know what would, and I think a lot of couples have this. Like, I don't know what would change if we make it legal or what would not change. Like, I'm sure a lot of legal aspects and contractual aspects will come into play. But in terms of pure play partnership, I don't want that certificate right now till I'm like 100% sure. And the reason I asked you this question is also because if someone turned around and said, "Are you going to be my partner for life?" I think it's a huge responsibility to place upfront. And I'm like, I don't know which country I'll be living in 2 years from now. I don't know what I'll want from life. And that could be me. Maybe other people are way more sorted. And I think that was the discussion we were having before we started recording. I think it's at the age of 80 or 90 when I'm reflecting back on life. At that point of time, I can say with absolute certainty that, yes, this person was my life partner. But to sit here right now and to say, this is going to be my life partner seems like a huge responsibility, which I don't know. I'm ready to take, or my partner's ready to take. So we'll figure.
And I'm going to bring the very Indian question as a follow up. So, what about your parents? What do they say about the situation? Because clearly, like in our lives, obviously the individuals alone don't always really matter, right? It has to be a joint decision.
I think parents also have like a threshold. At a certain point, they've just given up and they're just saying, you do what you want to do. But I also think the environment has a huge role to play. A lot of my friends and family and people we know have gone through divorces. So my parents' guidance is get married once, but do it right because a wrong marriage can have a lot of consequences. So take your time, do whatever you want, just be 100% sure. So I think they're at that stage right now.
Yeah. Like going back to our older seasons, and we've spoken to a few prickly women out there who've gotten out of marriages that didn't work. I think my biggest learning after even talking to them and looking at how they're living their lives was that their best lives came to them once they were free of those shackles. And like, if they had decided to just honor the life partner commitment because you signed a piece of paper, or your family wanted you to be that way, or because you were in a love marriage you couldn't get out. That reminds me of that episode. It was like they would have never led their best life. And I think the whole point of prickly pears is to help empowered women live their best lives, right? if you think about that, if we think about all the values that we want to drive in women today and in the future, life partnership should never up a spousal or a marital partnership should not mean life partnership by default.
Let me ask you this. What are the three downsides that you can think of at this point of time of not getting into the traditional mode of how we talk about spouses?
Oh, financial stability for one. That is, like, I say it as a person who is like more or less equally, like I drive equal or more financial outcomes in my lifelong partnership. But having two people jointly pooling in their resources, whether it's money, whether it's family, whether it's emotional support, whether it's buy one car instead of two when you don't have the money, like those kind of things in a traditional format is working so well, because obviously government and thinkers of those times, like when they proposed this format, it was, there are so many things that work there, because you and I both have friends who are single and who are, if someone's laid off, or you, like, if someone's laid off, like you don't even have a visa to live in this country anymore
Yeah.
after a while. If you live in your own country, visa is not a challenge, but all other financial things that come with just being alone, I think that is, so finances, definitely financial stability is the topmost in my mind. Emotional stability and support, because you just don't have your own family, you have the other person's family and their friends and this whole network of people. Your network of people suddenly doubles when you sign that piece of paper. Before getting married, like I didn't know. I have dated for more than 10 years different people, and there's always that level of discomfort when, friend of the guy doesn't want to be friends with you on Instagram, because what if it doesn't work, for example, right? Or I also today, like, sometimes don't want to add somebody's partner on Instagram, or like it's a big commitment, okay, like following someone on Instagram, or back in the day like Facebook friends. So, but then when you're married legally, you know that, okay,
You're talking to someone who constantly unfollows and follows her own partner.
so exactly, as you know, this is a big commitment. Imagine if you had to do that, not just for him but for like everybody else in his life. Okay, I unfollow him, but I also unfollow all the friends he he has. But then next time we get back together, I follow all of them again. It's just not realistic, Ankita. Like, we have enough things in life. So yeah, so like emotional support and just the stability, emotional stability of having that circle of friends and family. Of course, there are times when these things don't work out the way you plan, right? But in an ideal world, his parents, your parents, everybody's supporting and rooting for you. When you have a child, like, they step in to help. So basically,
Yeah.
yeah, emotional well-being and support, financial. And I can't think of. I mean, chores and again, that I don't know if that comes in financial, like just general living situation, right? Like, so hard to find a roommate that you like, but here you reasonably like that person, and you have an authority and a right to challenge them in their living ways, because both of you, like, okay, you left your sock in the living room kind of thing, right? Like, or you didn't clean the kitchen when I come back from business trip. Like, this is all real situations, guys. Like, I'm not making this up. Like, you come back from a business trip and you see that your husband hasn't cleaned the place when you expected it to be clean. Like, if it was a roommate, I would have gotten into a fight and it would have ended badly. Here, you can just have sex at the end of all of this. So yeah, these three.
And I think those are real advantages that exist of the traditional marriage. And I think when you choose to give that up, there's a different kind of societal pressure. Like, every whole system falls into place. There's no additional pressure or taunts or things that you have to listen to or questions that are being asked. So that falls out of the way. So I think there's a lot of stability that comes with it. And every time you choose to take a path that is different, it makes it harder. So you constantly say, that may not be right for me, but if I only go with it, that there are all of these benefits. And I think that's the trade off I'm curious about. Like, what is on the other side? Like, when you talk about joy, happiness, and things that fit in, I'm really curious to ask our guests, then what makes this option so much more worth it that you're willing to trade off all of the advantages that you mentioned? And then, of course, there are a whole bunch of other ones that also exist because the whole world is designed that way. So I think if I was to get to the crux of the question, I think that's the question that I'm really curious to ask, especially those who've chosen to not go that route.
And for those who have, right? Like there are empowered women who are in partnerships and marital partnerships, but they do it differently. Like how did do they do it differently? Like how does it work for them? What were they looking for? Like what was their checklist? I obviously can share mine, but that's not enough, right? And I'm only like just 4 years into this partnership, so we want to hear from people who've done it for much longer. What were they looking for when they chose this person? Like, Ankita, maybe you want to share with our listeners. We did this first offline event recently in Dublin where we were researching for our season. So, listeners, it's not like we have not been up to anything in this. It's not like we forgot about you. We wanted to do enough research before coming up with the proper topics of the season. And we went around in a park asking people questions, and you'll see some of the videos on our Instagram on lifelong partnerships and how do people think about this. Ankita, do you want to share what were like our findings, some of them?
I think the one that stood out for me is just and this might be a factor of it being a country that's not their own, but the amount of single women out there who are just finding it extremely challenging to find a partner. And almost all single women we asked is like, would you want to come to an in-person event to connect with other single women? And they're like, yes, we'd love an opportunity to come together and complain about how hard it is to do this thing. That was surprising because, sometimes when you don't find the life partner, you think there's something wrong with you. And then that's probably not true if there are a whole bunch of people who are in the same dilemma. So that was one thing. And then the second thing was when we did talk to people who were in relationships, we found a whole bunch of examples where men had given up their careers or jobs and stuff to move with their wife and support them. That's again something that years ago when I was in the marriage market via the matrimonial sites, the expectation was that the wife leave her job and move to wherever the husband is. So that was enlightening. And then the other part was just the number of men who just said, if you say yes to whatever your wife wants, the relationship will be a successful one. So
I mean, happy wife, happy life. I can't begin to even tell you how much I hate that line, but surprisingly, like men seem to think that works. But well, that's like it would take a whole new season.
even if they don't do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like that generic wisdom that no one follows, but everyone knows. Sometimes I want to ask those same men who say this. So, how many times does your wife orgasm the time you have sex? And then do you know what does happy wife even mean in quant terms, right? How do you quantify it? And I want to see their expressions because most of these are very misogynistic men who say these things. Happy wife, wife, happy life. Yeah.
Earlier, when you were talking about what are the things you want to know from people who are in relationships and long-term committed relationships in traditional, non-traditional ways, I think some of the things that I am constantly surprised with is, and that questions my definition of how I think of a relationship, is like, I always thought, and this is a funny anecdote, I don't know whether I've shared this before, my parents have always gone to sleep at the same time and woken up around the same time. And I thought that's how relationships work. And I go to bed at 10 p.m. So when my partner did not go to bed at 10 p.m., I would kick up such a big fuss. I'd be like, it's time to sleep. We have to sleep. And like earlier, obviously, when you're in the first few months of a relationship, people oblige. So we would go to sleep. And then when I would wake up, I would kick the other person. Like waking up was not that much of a problem. And then there was slow rebellion. So there were negotiations that, like, I'm an adult, I can choose when I should go to bed. And because I'd been told to negotiate everything in a relationship, I said, okay, can we go to bed at 10 p.m., I go to sleep, and then you get out of bed and go to sleep whenever. And it took me such a long time to be like, okay, a successful relationship does not involve two people going to sleep at the same time.
Yeah, which brings us to, I think, like addressing the fact that our idea of a lifelong partnership is heavily skewed by our parents, right? There are so many people whose parents got divorced, so they never want to marry. Like, because again, the lifelong partnership that they saw didn't work, so they don't think it can work otherwise. Or sometimes people just do the exact opposite. That I had so many Chinese friends who were brought up in China at the time when it was a one child rule and both parents had to go to different cities to work, and the child was generally left with the grandparents to be taken care of. All of those people married so early in their early 20s, had a child in the first 2 to 3 years of getting married, because their idea of a successful family life was to cohabitate with the child and, like, give the child a very good life. Like, that's their idea of lifelong partnership, was to bring a child up together in the same house, which is because they're trying to do the exact opposite of what their parents did. So yeah, like, you bring up such an excellent point of, we try to move away from our season one, but like, I think like it's the crux of everything.
It is. So we have a whole bunch of questions, prickly pears. So if you are surprised if I start asking people, do you sleep in the same bed or do you sleep in separate beds? Because if you sleep in separate beds, I'm still like, what? How does that work? So we're going to ask a lot of questions which are just extremely personal, probing. People can just choose to say, no, I'm not answering that. And people, on the other hand, are like, what is your definition of a life partner?
And or what is sexual intimacy in a lifelong partnership? Like, now I'm getting into a whole bunch of personal questions that I will ask, and let's see if people answer, right? So if what to expect from this season, I think definitely, yeah, these personal questions that we'll ask people. What was your checklist when you were looking for a life partner? Where does one go looking for a life partner if you believe in the traditional world? But is it still at a bar? Well, in India, it was never at a bar, but but nowadays, India is changing, and like in the world, this has been a common practice. Or do you like dating apps or marriage apps? Or what is the right age for this? Like, that's a big one in my mind, because in my mind, I always thought 30s was, yeah, I would never get married before 30s. I might have rejected a few marriage proposals of decent men only because I was in my 20s, because I wanted to do it differently. So what is the right age? Like, can people still have a lifelong partnership when they decide in their 20s? I think these are the things that we will try to look answers for our single listeners, and for people who are still there, or people who want to do it differently all over again. I don't know. Or people who want to pat themselves on the back to see that I did it the right way.
Just a couple of extremely curious girls asking extremely personal questions, because who's going to stop us?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's our podcast, so
You're in for a lot of fun. And as always, if you want to come on the show, or if you know someone who should be on the show, drop us a message via Instagram, anywhere. Actually, you have our email address also, so can't wait.
And on that note, Ankita, for a change, I'm going to get us out of here. We are the Prickly Pears, and stay tuned for this season.
And we are out.